Let me tell you a personal story that has profoundly impacted my life. In the summer of '97, when I was about 4 or 5 years old, there was a family gathering at our apartment in Al-Khaldiyah. I don't really remember much of that gathering. However, I do remember what happened shortly after. I was in the bedroom with my grandfather as I stood up at him, looking at him. His gray hair was beautiful, and I could see him smiling at me. And I can remember that. That was a beautiful moment for me. I also remember the beautiful green rug that was diagonally positioned in the direction of the holy city of Mecca because he was about to get ready for his prayer. That was around midnight, and Mom had come to me and she said, "It's time to sleep." But I was defiant. No, I want to stay with my grandfather. I refused to go, and she picked me up, and my grandfather was like, "Mohamed, tomorrow we will go and get some chocolate goods together from the grocery store." That was enough to get me to their room, but I stood in front of the door, my hands crossed, and I was like, I want to go back to my grandfather. Later, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, started screaming, "Mohamed, Mohamed," which was my grandfather's name. Screaming. My father, athletic as he was, jumped out of bed, rushed to see where the screams were coming from and what the reason was. I followed, and I felt like I was the fastest kid in the world. What had happened next was I walked in a room expecting to see something I would see normally. Instead, I walked in a room where I found my grandfather laying on the floor, peaceful and soulless. He was gone. Now, to think that that was enough trauma for a child, fast forward a few years later. It was Ramadan, the second day of Ramadan as I remember it. I was about 7 or 8 in 2001. My mother comes up to me and she's like, "Mohamed," as she always does, "it's time to sleep." I was like, "Mom, I'm gonna eat sahur," the meal before you prepare yourself for fasting. Apparently I took up sahur and fasting when I was 7 or 8 years old. I was walking with a heated plate of food and smiling that I was staying up. As I reached the doorway of my grandmother's room, I could see her coming towards me, pale and blue-faced. And she told me, "Mohamed, call your father." And at the time, it was perfect timing because my dad was just about to leave the house to get me school supplies for my project. And so he ran up, and that was when it happened. He went into the room. My grandmother was always plagued by diabetes and asthma. And in that moment, she had an acute asthma attack. So my father held her tightly, picked up the nebulizer, put the mask on her face. "It's okay, Mama, I'm here. Don't panic. Don't panic." I was there witnessing my grandmother as she saw her soul bitterly but surely fly to heaven. Now, when we're hit by tragedy, we all heal at our own pace. And each tragedy is different from one person to the next. There's not one formula for us to face with tragedy. But the way I dealt with it at the time, this was me when I was about 5 years old. And the way I dealt with it at the time was asking questions and looking at the world through the concept of fear. I was afraid of things. I was afraid of weather change. I had developed phobias of little things. You could see here I'm smiling, but in reality, I was afraid. And it came at a time when in the 4th grade, when the bullying started, I was the youngest boy in my class. You could imagine how these thoughts were percolating in my mind about death, and then people were making fun of me because I was shorter than them and smaller. I don't blame them, I was an easy target. But today I've ended up being taller than most of them. My way towards dealing with this was to ask questions. "Baba, why is the sky blue? Why isn't everything green?" I tried to make sense of things. You can imagine in a world where society is so close-knit, where your grandparents mean the world to you because they're always there and you think that they're never going to go away. But in reality, one day they do. At the time, teachers thought I wasn't good enough when it came to writing and reading. And some of them wanted to even retain me. told, told my parents that I was behind, but the strong support system at home kept me going forward. Until one day in the 8th grade, in my English class, I was given an assignment to write about anything. And I wrote, "We are all one." I handed in the paper to my teacher and she picked it up. And as she read, she whispered, "We are all one." Throughout, about 2 minutes later, tears started to trickle down her face. And she looked at me and told me, "Mohamed, this is beautiful." Eventually, it ended up in the first school publication as the first page, right over here. Throughout the years, my creativity was unleashed and I didn't know it was getting unleashed. I was writing and I was creating scenarios and stories, and I always had this passion to be a filmmaker or to make a difference with my story. Till I reached about the 12th grade when I became student council president and I unleashed my ability to speak to people and made promises of a swimming pool, which never happened until 2 years later. But then I went to university and I took, in my 4th year, I took a senior seminar class called Love and Death. I think that was the moment, that was the defining moment that changed my life in terms of taking my creativity to a whole other level. I had written a piece about how love is so connected to death and how death is so connected to what we love. And that what we love is so precious to us because we understand that one day it will no longer be. Eventually, I made a film, a short film, called The Final Chapter. And here's a clip of it.
Wherever we walk, it is there. All we need to do is realize it is there for us to see it, like a book on a shelf waiting to be seen in a library. As I continued to wonder, I often wandered off to search for death's definition. One of the definitions I came across was the damage of all pleasure. Death will come for even the most beautiful smiles and turn them into morbid realities of tormented weeping and broken hearts that lust for happiness, that lust for the past.
That short film won the Zayed University Middle East Film Festival Best Aspiring Filmmaker 2015 with the help of the cinematographer Saleh bin Hallabi. Now, why I'm showing you this is because I want to show you that my pain, or the pain of tragedy, can be embraced and can unleash a beautiful side of things. I read somewhere that adversity introduces man to himself. I was certainly introduced to myself at a very young age, and I was forced into maturity. But there was something good that came out of it. I was able to express myself through writing. I was able to express myself through visuals, and it allowed me to connect to people at a different level, a way where I understood what it meant to be sensitive, what it meant to be empathetic, what it meant to have that feeling of what it feels to feel alone. This developed into me writing, starting my own blog, emiratywriter.com. What I want to end with is a person who has truly inspired me throughout my years, the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. Now, how he has inspired me is the fact that we lived in a world, our country was a place of adversity where people suffered. And it took one man to believe that through our trials and tribulations, through this, the harshness of the desert, through the harshness of life, beauty can come with patience and the perseverance and grit to continue. For me, I had to learn the hard way. I had to learn that through the words that affected me from the bullying, through the imagination and the remembering of my grandparents leaving, with all this creative thoughts, these thoughts that percolated in my mind of what if I'm next, or what if mom and dad or my sister and brother are next. So my message to you all, to the youth of the UAE and to the youth of the entire world and to everyone listening to this is allow yourselves to fall. Allow tragedies to plague you, because life is not an easy ride. Life is meant to be difficult, but it is how we, through our own experiences, make the most of it. And it is my message to you to find that ability and that greatness within you to make your story beautiful. Thank you.